You know, when you picture the ancient Maya, what comes to mind? Probably those giant pyramids, right? Or their super complex calendars. And yeah, that stuff is amazing. But what if I told you that behind all of that, there was something even more impressive? I'm talking about their agriculture. A system so smart, so ingenious, it managed to feed millions of people in one of the toughest landscapes on Earth.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth did they pull that off? You've got these huge cities sprawling across jungles, mountains, wetlands, and they had zero modern technology. No tractors, no fancy irrigation systems, nothing. So how did they feed everyone? That is exactly what we are going to dive into right now.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the big picture problem they were up against. Then, we're going to take a trip through 3 totally different environments: the lowlands, the highlands, and the rainforest. We'll see the clever solutions they came up with for each one. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by talking about what their real legacy is.
Okay, so first things first. You've got to understand that the Maya world wasn't just one big uniform place. Not at all. They were dealing with a crazy mix of environments. You could be in a swampy lowland in one area and then a super rugged mountain range in another. Their success, really, their genius, was that they didn't have a one-size-fits-all solution. They figured out how to tailor-make their strategies for each specific challenge.
So let's kick things off in the lowlands. Now, you might think the problem here was a lack of water, but it's actually the opposite, kind of. The real issue was consistency, or, the total lack of it. They had to figure out how to survive in a place that swung wildly between 2 really dangerous extremes.
I mean, just look at this. It's a land of extremes. From May to December, you've got these insane heavy rains. We're talking major flooding. But then, come January, the tap just shuts off. For the next 4 months, it's nothing but severe, bone-dry drought. Seriously, how do you farm at a place like that? Well, their solution? It was nothing short of incredible.
See, instead of trying to fight against all that water, they did something way smarter. They engineered a way to work with it. So, first step, they dug a whole network of canals. This helped them manage and redirect all that extra rainwater from the wet season. Then, and this is clever, they took all the dirt they dug up and used it to build these raised earth platforms for planting. It literally lifted their crops up high and dry, safe from the floods.
But hold on, because this is where it goes from clever to genius. They didn't just build a farm. Oh no. They created an entire self-sustaining ecosystem. They put aquatic plants in the water, which helped keep it clean. Then they added fish to the canals. Now, not only did they have another food source, but, and you gotta love this, the fish waste became a perfect all-natural fertilizer for the fields on the raised platforms. It's this incredible closed-loop system where everything supports everything else. Just brilliant.
All right, so let's leave the wetlands behind and head for the hills. Literally, we're moving to a totally different environment, the highlands. And here, the big problem wasn't about managing water. It was about fighting gravity itself on these super steep, rugged mountainsides.
So what did they do? Their solution was, well, it was bold. They basically reshaped the mountains. They cut these huge, step-like terraces right into the slopes. What this did was create a series of flat, stable platforms that were perfect for planting. Plus, it had the awesome side effect of stopping all that precious topsoil from just washing away when the heavy rains came.
But just creating the farmland wasn't enough. They had to make it super productive. And they did. On these terraces, they became masters of something called multi-cropping. It's basically a technique where you plant and harvest on the same piece of land multiple times a year. This meant they had a constant, reliable flow of food coming in.
So what exactly was on the menu? Well, the number one crop, the absolute staple, was maize, or as we know it, corn. But it wasn't just corn. They grew a whole variety of other stuff to go with it. Things you'll definitely recognize: beans, squash, tomatoes, and of course, chili peppers.
Okay, for our last stop, we're heading deep into the rainforest. This environment presented its own unique set of challenges, and the Maya responded with a really cool mix of strategies. They figured out that the forest could be both their farm and their pantry.
Now, one of their main farming techniques in the forest was what's known as slash and burn, and the name is pretty literal. They'd clear a section of trees, let them dry, and then burn everything. All that ash would then get mixed into the soil, giving it this huge boost of nutrients. It created a really fertile plot of land, perfect for planting.
But here's the thing. The Maya were way too smart to think this was some kind of permanent magic trick. They knew it was a temporary solution. After a few years of planting, the crops would soak up all those nutrients from the ash. So what did they do? They just move on to a new spot and repeat the process, letting the old plot rest and recover for years. It shows they had a really sophisticated understanding of long-term land management.
But this is really important. They didn't put all their eggs in the slash and burn basket. Their whole approach was way more diverse than that. They understood that the rainforest itself was like a giant natural supermarket, offering up all kinds of resources that you didn't even have to plant.
For instance, they raised animals like turkeys, which was a great source of protein. And at the same time, they were expert foragers. They'd gather things the forest just provided, like the fruit from the breadnut tree. The seeds from this tree were super nutritious. You could eat them whole or even grind them up into flour.
So when you put it all together, you start to see this picture of an incredibly rich and varied diet. I mean, they were hunting deer and rabbits, they were raising dogs, they even kept these special stingless bees to get honey. And if you were near the coast, you'd be eating fish and turtles. But it went beyond food too. They knew the forest was also their pharmacy, using all sorts of plants for medicine.
Okay, so we've seen all of this incredible ingenuity, right? The wetlands, the terraces, the rainforest strategies. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, to really get what the Maya were all about, we have to put their achievements into the right historical context.
You know, it's a really common misconception that the Maya just invented everything they're famous for. But that's not quite right. They were actually part of a much longer history of amazing Mesoamerican cultures. Things like writing and building pyramids, those ideas were around before the Maya came onto the scene.
And this quote really nails it. It says, "The Maya often improved upon practices originally borrowed from other cultures." And that's the key. Their real genius wasn't always about pure, from-scratch invention. It was about brilliant innovation. They were masters at taking an existing idea and taking it to a whole new level, perfecting it.
And that is their true legacy. They were absolute masters of adaptation. They could look at any environment, understand its unique challenges, and then brilliantly improve on the knowledge they already had to create something new, something that worked. That's how they built a civilization that thrived for centuries. So I'll just leave you with this to think about. When you consider everything we've talked about, those self-sustaining wetland farms, the incredible mountain terraces, and all of those clever rainforest techniques, which one of those solutions strikes you as the most ingenious? It's a tough call, right?